You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 14.
Inside the bus, all was dark and quiet. It was, Burnmaster thought, uncomfortably like a giant tomb. Over the last 6 hours, the vitality of the passengers had slowly dwindled away. At first, there were lots of ideas about how to get out, but in the end, none were promising and most seemed more like total stupidity than serious escape plans. The despair was infectious. It took hold of them, one at a time. After a few hours, there was less talk, and as time passed, soon the only sounds were the slow intake of breath. Perhaps it was the darkness sucking the fight out of them. There was a sense of people savoring their last moments. With nowhere to run and nothing they could fight, they became more and more resigned to their situation and their fate. Burnmaster had never imagined that his life, so filled with adventure, would end this way. Being eaten by a tiger at the Vaile Zoo, maybe, tumbling from the side of a mountain during a climb, possibly, but dying while trapped in a bus under a landslide, what an anticlimax. It would hardly even get a mention in the newspapers. Isabelle was sitting in a spot that was free of broken glass, with her back against what used to be the ceiling of the bus. Everybody had switched off their torches to conserve batteries, and the darkness hid the horror of the bus being on its side. She was between Twigger and Laheeti. She couldn't see them, but she felt their closeness. Gulbenkian was sitting next to Laheeti and Pemba was next to Twig. Burnmaster hadn't spoken in a while, and now she couldn't remember where he was. She was feeling tired and vaguely remembered overhearing Pemba talking about carbon dioxide building up in the bus. "What do you think is going to happen to us, Pemba?" she asked. From the blackness beside Isabelle, Twig said, "Yeah, Pemba, you must have heard about people getting trapped in buses under landslides before. They usually survive, right?" "Ah, actually, I haven't heard many stories about that," Pemba replied, "but I think, if I remember correctly, the people sometimes survive." "Only sometimes?" Isabelle asked. "What does that mean in terms of a percentage?" It means less than 100% survive," he said, a little evasively. She was starting to notice that Pemba had a knack for evading questions. "Can't you be more exact?" she asked. "I don't really remember the stories," he said. "I heard them a long time ago." There was another voice from the darkness, Laheeti's this time. "So what do you reckon our chances of survival are?" he asked. Pemba might have shrugged. "Hard to say," he said. "You must have some idea," pressed Laheeti. "So tell us, it hardly matters one way or the other now." "Yeah," agreed Isabelle, "and don't sugarcoat it or anything. We want to know the truth, no matter how hard it is to hear." Pemba's voice was coldly matter-of-fact. "The truth is we are all going to die here." "What?" the 14-year-olds exclaimed in unison. "Are you serious?" Isabelle blurted out. "How can you be so sure?" Twig added. "Yeah, we've only been here for 6 hours or so," argued Laheeti. "The rescue teams are probably digging their way to us right now." Pemba sighed heavily. "There's no rescue team coming for us because Shabrubesi doesn't have enough resources for that sort of thing," he answered patiently. "It's going to be days before there is any heavy earth-moving equipment here." To Laheeti, that sounded hopeful. "So we wait days then. A person can go days without food and water, right?" "I read an article," Isabelle added, "about a guy who survived for 15 days in the snow without food and water. So I figure we've got a good chance of surviving this bus." "Did he also survive for 15 days without air?" asked Pemba. "No, of course not. He was," she began and then paused. "Oh, crap. You mean we're going to run out of air too? I didn't think of that." "I didn't need to know that," Twig said morosely. "You told me not to sugarcoat it," Pemba explained. "I didn't tell you that, Isabelle did," Twig replied. "Wouldn't you rather know the truth?" asked Pemba. The answer to that question was no, but nobody said it. Now that the truth was out, it couldn't be taken back. Isabelle was quiet for a while and then asked, "If you want to talk about the truth, tell me this. Do you really believe there are no yeti?" Pemba laughed hollowly. "You really care about that at a time like this?" he asked. "Well, I figure that if I'm going to die on this bus, it would be nice to know if I totally wasted my time coming to Nepal to look for yeti," Isabelle explained. Pemba was quietly impressed by her plucky attitude in the face of such dire circumstances. He hadn't expected that from Isabelle, whom he had generally concluded was a well-meaning but naive girl whose greatest hardship in life was having to walk home from school in the rain. On the other hand, he himself felt gripped by a gnawing despair that weighed heavily on him. It was as though he could feel the landslide actually pressing down on his shoulders. He had seen and done many interesting things in his life, but at 15 years of age he didn't feel ready to die, especially if the dying involved first being buried alive. If he could have his way, he would prefer that the bus went over the edge of the precipice. That, at least, would make the end nice and quick. a few seconds to ponder what could have been, and then oblivion. And it sure beat the heck out of gasping for his last breath in a bus that had been put on spin cycle. He thought about Isabelle's question again. He had no good reason to tell her the truth, and to do so would be a breach of his solemn obligation to his furry Himalayan friends. He wondered what Zaw and Abby were doing right now. They had probably worked out what had happened to him, but even yeti claws were no match for the tons of mud on top of the bus. Imagining his two friends standing under the stars in the Nepal night sky, he wished he had the opportunity to say one last goodbye. Isabelle was waiting. What the heck, he thought, it hardly matters now. The truth would stay buried in this bus. In that case, he said, the answer to your question is that the yeti are definitely real. So you do believe that the yeti are real? She exclaimed. I knew it. I don't just believe in them. I live with them, in the mountains in a place called Shangri-La, he said. He leaned his head back, picturing his home, and his voice became wistful. You should see it, it's beautiful, he continued. Impossible to find unless you know how, but when you get there, it's an oasis in the middle of the most inhospitable place on earth. The yeti have lived there for thousands of years. They can talk, you know, the yeti I mean. They're smart too, and good with technology. My best friend is a yeti. He talks a lot. In fact, his big mouth often gets him in trouble. His name is Zaw. You'd get along with him. He's got a lot of spirit like you. Isabelle's voice was filled with sarcasm. So you've got a friend that's a talking yeti, huh? She said. You wanted the truth, replied Pemba. For a moment there, I thought you were being serious with me, Isabelle said. You told me the truth all right, and the truth is you're full of it. Just then, there was a loud bang that sent a quick tremor through the bus. Everybody froze, their senses alert for any indications of another landslide. A deathly silence fell over the bus, but when there were no further sounds from outside, people began to whisper among themselves as if the very sound of their voices would trigger another tremor. The Nepalese passengers were speaking in their local dialect, but the fear in their voices needed no translation. What was that? Asked Isabelle. Sounded like something hitting the bus, replied Twigger. Which part of the bus? Asked Laheeti. The side, I think, mused Twig. Do you think the landslide is moving again? Asked Isabelle. Could be, Laheeti answered. We must be pretty close to the edge already, said Isabelle. If the landslide carries us much further, there was a burst of yellow light as Burnmaster switched on his torch and shone it at the 14-year-olds. The last 6 hours of stress had taken their toll on the South African, and he looked tired with dark rings around his eyes. Shush, you guys, we're trying to listen, he whispered. Suddenly, there was another bang on the side of the bus. It produced a few moments of complete silence, but everybody recovered from the shock faster this time. There it is again, whispered Isabelle. That one was further along than the previous one, observed Burnmaster. I think it's another landslide, Twig said. Then how come the bus isn't sliding? Asked Laheeti. Maybe it is and we just don't know it, said Isabelle. After all, if there is a layer of mud underneath. Suddenly, there was a third bang on the side of the bus, cutting Isabelle off mid-sentence. It was like some perverse clock, sounding out the final slow seconds to the passenger's demise. The Nepalese became more and more agitated, and several men began talking excitedly. That one was further along again, Burnmaster said thoughtfully. Shining the yellow beam of his torch at successive places along the side of the bus, he continued, first there, and then there. That's starting to sound like a pattern. I don't think those sounds are the landslide. I think somebody is out there trying to find us. By banging on the side of the bus, Isabelle asked dubiously. It makes sense, he said. In order to dig us out, they first have to work out exactly where we are. The 14-year-olds exchanged hopeful glances, but Pemba didn't feel their optimism. But the sounds came from the side of the bus, he mused. How is that possible if we are surrounded by tons of mud? I could believe you if the sounds came from the top, but from the side. The light danced around as Burnmaster scratched the back of his neck. I admit that is a bit odd, he agreed. The chatter from a group of Nepalese men near the front of the bus had grown louder. Burnmaster shone his torch in their direction to see what was going on. There was a lot of movement, but he made out two men arguing over what appeared to be a small red fire extinguisher. Can you understand what they're saying, Pemba? Asked Burnmaster. Yes, said Pemba. They're arguing about the best way to break the windscreen using the fire extinguisher. I had a feeling you were going to say that, Burnmaster said, rising to his feet with new vigor. You've got to tell them to stop, he continued. If they break the windscreen, we're all done for. There's every chance those noises are a search and rescue team. Pemba remained sitting, content to argue with Burnmaster from the floor of the bus. What fantasy world are you living in? He muttered. Back where you come from there might be search and rescue teams stationed on every city block, but in Nepal there simply isn't. You think those banging sounds are a search and rescue team, but they aren't. They're just banging sounds. Your imagination is playing tricks on you. Nobody is coming for us, and those men down there know that. That's a terrific attitude, chided Burnmaster. Hey, at least I'm facing reality, Pemba replied. Isabelle stepped forward. Please, Pemba, even if you don't believe it, will you do it for us? Because we believe it. Pemba sighed, then stood up and moved down the bus, muttering something that Isabelle couldn't make out. She watched as he interrupted the Nepalese men and had a conversation with them, not one word of which she understood. Twice they cast angry glances at Isabelle and her companions, and after a couple of minutes, Pemba returned to report that the men intended to continue with their plan. See, I told you so, Pemba said with a shrug. They think another landslide is coming, so they're going to try and dig their way out. Just ask them to wait another 30 minutes, Burnmaster urged. We've waited this long. Another 30 minutes won't make any difference. I'm starting to regret letting you people know I speak English, Pemba muttered as he headed down the bus again. Despite his pessimism, Pemba argued passionately on Burnmaster's behalf. The Nepalese men appeared reluctant to abandon their plan, but eventually Pemba convinced them to wait a little longer. It was, in many ways, an easy sell: die now, or wait half an hour and then die. There was something of a diplomat in Pemba's manner, and he parted company with the Nepalese men after exchanging handshakes and weak smiles. Not too bad given the circumstances. Thank you, Pemba, Isabelle said after he explained what had happened. That's okay, he said, but what are you going to do when the half an hour runs out? We'll work that out, said Burnmaster. In half an hour. I knew you were going to say that, Pemba sighed. Outside, the GXs worked side by side, digging through the mud that separated them from the trapped bus. Due to his claustrophobia, Flattop had positioned himself nearest to the mouth of the tunnel, and Maine, on account of his fear of the dark, had slotted new batteries into his torch to make sure it was running at maximum brightness. Only Mohawk wasn't bothered by the conditions. In fact, operating in small dark places was his commando forte. He dug ferociously, and it helped him forget about the fact that he was standing on the side of a very tall mountain. Maine had lost track of how long they had been digging when he struck something hard with a dull clang. Withdrawing his supersized shovel, he saw a dent in its lower edge, and by the light of the torch, he made out the unmistakable shine of a greasy metal shape protruding from the black mud wall. I reckon this is it, fellas, he said. He quickly scraped away more mud to reveal the metal shape in greater detail. It looked like a thick vertical pipe. That don't look like the side of any bus I've ever seen, grunted Flattop. Looks more like a piece of debris. Then why can't I pull it out? Asked Maine as he gripped the metal object and tried to free it from the mud. It didn't budge. Mohawk cleared several handfuls of mud away at the top of the metal object and revealed a large black tire. There's your reason, he declared. This pipe is an axle running between two wheels. The bus is lying on its side, and we're looking at the bottom of the bus. Crouching down, they quickly excavated another tire at the bottom of the axle to prove that Mohawk was right. There's no point looking for the door then, because it will either be way over our heads or underneath the bus, Flattop said. So how are we gonna get the people out, if they're still alive, that is? I ain't dragging no bodies out. Maine ignored the comment. If this is the front axle of the bus, then the front of the bus should be right here, he said, indicating an area of the mud wall. If we dig through to the windscreen, we can just break it and let the passengers out. With their plan of action decided, they energetically set to work. Even Flattop dug with more enthusiasm, sensing that the end of this irritation was near. He didn't care whether the passengers on this pesky bus were alive or dead. He just wanted to finish this task and get the mission back on track. After all, saving lives other than those of his brothers wasn't part of his job description. And it wasn't part of Maine's either, for that matter. This worrying need to help other people is something I had better bring to the attention of our masters back in North Korea, Flattop thought. It's bad for the mission and bad for the team. Heck, we've risked our necks to dig this bus out. This landslide could collapse on us at any moment. Talk about a waste of time. Maine's really starting to become a loose cannon, jeopardizing us and the mission objective. It ain't right, he was fine back in North Korea. This trip to Nepal has really messed up his priorities. If he's not careful, he's gonna become a total liability to everybody and end up being surplus to requirements. But Flattop kept those thoughts to himself and kept digging. Inside the bus, the Nepalese men with the small red fire extinguisher had decided that half an hour had passed, and there was still no sign of any rescue team coming to save them. Two men determinedly took hold of either side of the extinguisher and positioned themselves in front of the windscreen with the clear intention of driving the extinguisher through the glass like a battering ram. Pemba glanced at Burnmaster skeptically. "Don't tell me you want me to go and ask them to wait another half an hour," he groaned. "The thought did cross my mind," Burnmaster replied. "I don't think they're going to listen anymore," Pemba said. "How about just 10 minutes, then?" asked Burnmaster. "You're kidding yourself," Pemba replied, shaking his head. Burnmaster started towards the Nepalese men. "I'll do it myself," he said, with more determination than he felt. In truth, he was in the grip of a great sadness. He had hoped to see a rescue team emerge from the mud behind the windscreen, but the past half an hour had yielded nothing more than a few more bangs and clangs from outside the bus. It was quite possible the landslide was moving again, but Burnmaster refused to give up hope. It was all he had left in these remaining hours. He dared not place a restraining hand on the Nepalese men for fear that the gesture would be interpreted as open aggression, so he positioned himself between them and the windscreen and held up his hands imploringly. He didn't need to speak their language to understand what they said next. It was clear that they believed they had held up their end of the bargain, and now they were ready to take matters into their own hands. "I'm pleading with you," Burnmaster said, knowing the men would understand the tone of his voice if not his words. "If you break the glass, it will mean death for us all." Suddenly, the men dropped the extinguisher to the floor and, with their gazes raised towards the heavens, began murmuring reverently. Believing he had convinced them of the error of their ways, Burnmaster felt a flood of relief, sensing that the immediate danger had passed. He had bought everybody another 10 minutes, if nothing more. Then Isabelle came running up excitedly. "Look, Tom, behind you," she yelled. Burnmaster spun around, lifted his eyes, and found himself looking up at the strangest face he had ever seen. Smeared with black mud, it was a face characterized by huge nostrils, a granite jaw, and a shock of shiny silver hair. Lit from beneath by torchlight, it looked like a gargoyle peering through the windscreen. "It's your rescue team, Tom," exclaimed Isabelle. Pemba hurried forward, unable to believe what he was hearing. He was darn sure there was no rescue team coming to save them, and he half expected to see Zaw's furry face staring through the glass. But the huge face framed by an expanding circle of clean glass was definitely not owned by a yeti. "I don't believe it," he breathed. "Nobody can dig through that much mud so fast." "We'll talk about impossibilities later," said Burnmaster. "Let's find a way out of this bus." Just then, a shudder shook the bus like the first tremor of an imminent earthquake. Several people stumbled, including Isabelle, who fell heavily against the wall but was caught by the strong arms of Gulbenkian. Laheeti and Twig were standing closer to handholds and managed to stay on their feet. There was a second shudder, and then the unmistakable sound of steel grinding against gravel as the bus began to slowly slide along the mountain road. To Isabelle's ears, it sounded like 10,000 fingernails scratching down a blackboard. "The landslide is pushing the bus," yelled Pemba. "We need to get out right now." "Break the windscreen," howled Burnmaster. "But I thought you said don't break it," Pemba screamed. "That was when I thought the bus was surrounded by mud," Burnmaster replied, grabbing the small fire extinguisher. "But the windscreen is clear and it's the only way out, so take the other side of this and help me break the glass." The silver-haired giant disappeared from view. "Oh my God, he's left us," exclaimed Isabelle. "I can't believe he's left us." Grasping the metal fire extinguisher between them, Burnmaster and Pemba thrust it into the windscreen with all of their might. Crack. At the point of impact, a spider web of cracks radiated out, but the windscreen remained intact. "Again," roared Burnmaster, but the second strike and then the third failed to break the glass as well. "It's not working," cried Isabelle. Outside, the rumble of the landslide increased in intensity until it was a deafening roar. "Let's get out of here," howled Flattop. Maine shook his head. "They're alive, I saw them, I'm not leaving them," he yelled. "This whole landslide is about to come down on top of us, you idiot," snapped Flattop. Taking up the battered car door that had served as his trusty shovel, Maine tried to take a swing at the bus's windscreen. But the narrow cleft of mud that he had cleared from in front of the bus was only large enough for him to stand in and left no space for him to swing the car door. "We've tried, Maine, we can't do more than that," urged Flattop. "There's no reason for us to die in here as well." The bus was inching away from the GXs with every passing second. Maine's searching gaze stopped on the axle protruding from the mud. It was a GX-sized handle, and big enough for all three of the brothers to take a hold of at the same time. That meant they could use their combined strength to drag the bus from the mud. Maine wasn't sure if they could do it, but there was only one way to find out. They were all moments from death and destruction. Seizing the axle with both enormous hands, Mane roared, "Grab hold of the axle and pull." Mohawk did so, digging the soles of his hiking boots into the ground for grip. But Flattop hesitated, wasting valuable seconds. "Are you crazy?" he yelled. "There's no time. Just shut up and pull," howled Mane. Inside the bus, the passengers were preparing themselves for the end. The rescue team had deserted them, and the thundering landslide was carrying them to their deaths. Another violent force shook the bus, throwing the stricken passengers in all directions. "This is it," yelled Twigger. "We're going over the edge. Hold onto something." Gulbenkian faced his young charge with a look of sadness and shame. "I'm sorry, Laheeti," he said quietly, and because of the danger of the moment, he didn't stutter. "I have protected you from many things, but I couldn't protect you from this." "We're not dead yet, Gull," replied Laheeti, bracing himself against the bus seats. "So save your apology until we're standing at the pearly gates." Pemba and Isabelle were standing next to each other. Given his recent lies about the yeti, she didn't want to speak to him again, so it was unfortunate that he was the last person she would see as she went to her doom. She decided to make her final moments count. "I just want you to know that I liked you," she declared. "Right up to the point when you lied to me about the talking yeti and all that nonsense about a place called Shangri-La. That was really cruel of you. I hated you from then on." Pemba glanced at her incredulously. "But that was the truth," Isabelle fumed. "Liar," she screamed. A nagging doubt tugged at Burnmaster's mind as he clung to a handhold near the windscreen. If the bus was being pushed by the landslide, it should have been moving sideways. But he clearly felt the bus being accelerated forward in a regular series of jerks. It didn't make any sense, and he wondered if his adrenaline-charged mind was deceiving him. He prided himself on being a guy who kept a cool head in dangerous situations, but panic must have gotten the better of him. Because if the bus was moving forward, that meant the bus was being pulled out of the landslide. It was too much to hope for, and wrapping his weathered fingers more firmly around the handhold, he prepared himself for whatever was coming. The North Korean GX super soldiers were, quite simply, a force of nature. With determined howls that were drowned out by the avalanche, Mohawk, Mane, and Flattop used their extraordinary strength to rip the bus from the black depths of the landslide. Once it was free of the sucking grip of the mud, their combined force accelerated the bus along the mountain road and away from the path of the thundering landslide. The rear of the bus was showered with mud and dirt as several tons of the mountain crashed down onto the gravel road, blasting everything in its path over the edge of the precipice. Had the bus been caught in the onslaught, it would have sailed helplessly into the dark valley far below, and the passengers would have had a few silent, weightless moments to comprehend their doom. Orange sparks flared and jumped from the underside of the bus as it raced along the gravel road towards safety. It plowed forward with the momentum of a derailed freight train. Hearing the roar of the landslide behind them, the GXs gripped the front axle more tightly and kept their powerful legs pumping over and over and their booted feet pounding against the ground. Soon they were safely away from the avalanche, but they didn't stop pushing until the bus smashed up against a parked car. Behind them, the roar of the landslide quickly subsided and the mountain road grew silent once more. Dust motes floated in the glow of the headlights from nearby cars. Exhausted, the GXs released their iron grip on the axle and staggered back, gulping in air. 6 hours of vigorous digging followed by a few seconds of intense exercise had tested even their incredible endurance. Mane was the first to recover. Glancing back, he estimated that they had dragged the bus about 20 meters from the edge of the landslide. Still a little too close for comfort, but the danger seemed to have passed, for the moment anyway. The tunnel he and his brothers had dug was gone. The new landslide had obliterated all traces of the first one and had made the road even more impassable. This route through the mountains was going to be blocked for some time. Mohawk gave Flattop a friendly slap on the back. "Doesn't get much closer than that, huh?" he laughed. "I hope it was worth the effort," grunted Flattop. The bus had smashed into the same car that Flattop had, several hours earlier, ripped the doors off and dropped a boulder on. Now water and steam poured from the cracked radiator as a result of the collision with the bus. All three events had been unfortunate coincidences, but the owner, who was circling his car and shaking his head in despair, was asking himself some soul-searching questions about his own karma. Whatever value his car had at the beginning of the night, it was now scrap metal. Mane gave the wrecked car little thought as he jumped up onto its bonnet and peered into the bus through the clean spot on the windscreen. He saw silhouettes moving around slowly, which was a good sign because it meant somebody in there was still alive. He wiped handfuls of black mud off the glass so he could see inside more clearly. Yes, there were definitely people alive in there. He considered rolling the bus back onto its wheels so that the people inside could get out through the door, but decided that was a bad idea. If anybody was hurt, the roll would just make their injuries worse. No, the bus had to stay on its side, and that meant the fastest way out was through the windscreen. The boulder resting on the bonnet behind him was the closest solid object at hand. It probably weighed several 100 kilograms and would pass through the glass easily, but it wouldn't do to drop it on the legs of some luckless passenger lying on the floor in front of the windscreen. After clearing away more mud from the glass, Maine checked to see if the coast was clear. A tan man with blue eyes standing at the front of the bus seemed to get the message without being told, and he moved everybody back a safe distance. Wrapping his huge arms around the boulder, Maine lifted it off the bonnet with a grunt and dropped it through the windscreen of the bus. There was a terrific popping sound, like a million plastic bubble wrap bubbles being popped at once, and then the glass disintegrated, followed by the steady tinkle-tinkle of shards falling to the ground. He waited, then cleared away any sharp bits that clung to the frame. From inside the bus, yellow beams of torchlight were directed at him, making his silver eyebrows and mud-streaked mane of hair shine brightly in the night.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.